I make my living forecasting the future for people, he said. I know the science of twigs, and I know how to make them penetrate to the place where all is written. There I can read the past, discover what has already been forgotten, and understand the omens that are here in the present. When people consult me, it's not that I'm reading the future, I'm guessing at the future. The future belongs to God, and it is only He who reveals it, under extraordinary circumstances. How do I guess at the future? Based on the omens of the present. The secret is here in the present. If you pay attention to the present, you can improve upon it. And if you improve on the present, what comes later will also get better. Forget about the future and live each day according to the teachings, confident that God loves His children. Each day in itself brings with it an eternity. The camel driver had asked what their circumstances were under which God would allow him to see the future. Only when He Himself reveals it, and God only rarely reveals the future. When He does so, it is only for one reason. It's a future that was written so as to be altered. God had shown the boy a part of the future, the camel driver thought. Why was it that He wanted the boy to serve as His instrument? Go and speak to the tribal chieftains, said the camel driver. Tell them about the armies that are approaching. They'll laugh at me. They are men of the desert, and the men of the desert are used to dealing with omens. Well, then they'll probably know already. They're not concerned with that right now. They believe if they have to know about something Allah wants them to know, someone will tell them about it. It happened many times before, but this time, the person is you. The boy thought of Fatima, and he decided he would go to see the chieftains of the tribe. The boy approached the guard at the front of the huge white tent at the center of the oasis. I want to see the chieftains. I've brought the omens from the desert. Without responding, the guards entered the tent, where he remained for some time. When he emerged, it was a young Arab dressed in white and gold. It was with a young Arab dressed in white and gold. The boy told the younger man what he had seen, and the man asked him to wait there. He disappeared into the tent. Night fell, and an assortment of fighting men and merchants entered and exited the tent. One by one, the campfires were extinguished, and the oasis fell as quiet as the desert. Only the lights in the great tent remained. During this time, the boy thought about Fatima, and he was still unable to understand his last conversation with her. Finally, after hours of waiting, the guard bade the boy enter. The boy was astonished by what he saw inside. Never could he have imagined that, there in the middle of the desert, there existed a tent like this one. The ground was covered with the most beautiful carpets he had ever walked upon, and from the top of the structure hung lamps of wrought iron gold, each with a lighted candle. The tribal chieftains were seated at the back of the tent in a semicircle, resting upon richly embroidered silk cushions. Servants came and went with silver trays laden with spices and tea. Other servants maintained the fires in the hookahs. The atmosphere was suffused with a sweet scent of smoke. There were 8 chieftains, but the boy could see immediately which one was the most important, an Arab dressed in white and gold, seated at the center of the semicircle. At his side was the young Arab boy he had spoken with earlier. Who is this stranger who speaks of omens? Asked one of the chieftains, eyeing the boy. It is I, the boy answered, and he told what he had seen. Why would the desert reveal such things to a stranger when it knows that we have been here for generations? Another chieftain asked. Because my eyes are not yet accustomed to the desert, the boy said. I can see things that eyes habituated to the desert might not see. And also because I know about the soul of the world, he thought to himself. The oasis is a neutral ground. No one attacks an oasis, the third chieftain said. I can only tell you what I saw. If you don't want to believe me, you don't have to do anything about it. The men fell into an animated discussion. They spoke an Arabic dialect that the boy didn't understand, but when he made to leave, the guard told him to stay. The boy became fearful. The omen told him that something was wrong. He regretted having spoken to the camel driver about what he had seen in the desert. Suddenly, the elder at the center smiled almost imperceptibly, and the boy felt better. The man hadn't participated in the discussion, and in fact hadn't said a word up until that point. But the boy was already used to the language of the world, and he could feel the vibrations of peace throughout the tent. Now his intuition was that he could be right in coming. He had been right in coming. The discussion ended. The chieftains were silent for a few moments as they listened to what the old man was saying. Then he turned to the boy. This time his expression was cold and distant. 2,000 years ago, in a distant land, a man who believed in dreams was thrown into a dungeon and was sold as a slave, the old man said, now in a dialect the boy understood. Our merchants bought that man and brought him to Egypt. All of us know whosoever believes in dreams also knows how to interpret them. The elder continued, when the Pharaoh dreamed of cows that were thin and cows that were fat, this man I'm speaking of rescued Egypt from famine. His name was Joseph. He too was a stranger in a strange land, like you, and he was probably about your age. He paused, and his eyes were unfriendly. Still, we always observe the tradition. The tradition saved Egypt from famine in those days and made the Egyptians the wealthiest of people. The tradition teaches men how to cross the desert and how their children should marry. The tradition says that an oasis is a neutral territory because both sides have oases and both are vulnerable. No one said a word as the man continued. But the tradition also says that we should believe the messages of the desert. Everything we know was taught to us by the desert. The man gave a signal and everyone stood. The meeting was over. The hookahs were extinguished and the guard stood at attention. The boy made ready to leave again, but the old man spoke again. Tomorrow we're going to break the agreement that says that no one at the oasis may carry arms. Throughout the entire day, we will be on the lookout for our enemies. When the sun sets, the men will once again surrender their arms to me. For every 10 dead men among our enemies, you will receive a piece of gold. But arms cannot be drawn unless they go onto battle. Arms are as capricious as the desert, and if they are not used, the next time they might not function. If at least one of them hasn't been used by the end of the day tomorrow, one will be used on you. This is some serious shit. When the boy left the tent, the oasis was illuminated only by the light of the full moon. He was 20 minutes from his tent and began to make his way there. He was alarmed by what had happened. He had succeeded in reaching through the soul of the world, and now the price for having done so might be his life. It was a frightening bet, but he had been making risky bets ever since the day he had sold his sheep to pursue his personal legend. And, as the camel driver had said, to die tomorrow was no worse than dying on any other day. Every day there was to be lived or to mark one's departure from this world. Everything depends on one word, maktub. Walking along in the silence, he had no regrets. If he died tomorrow, it would be because God was not willing to change the future. He would at least have died after having crossed the strait, after having worked in a crystal shop, after having known the silence of the desert and Fatima's eyes. He had lived every one of his days intensely since he had left home so long ago. If he died tomorrow, he would already have seen more than other shepherds, and he was proud of that. Suddenly he heard a thundering sound, and he was thrown to the ground by wind, such as he had never known. The area was swirling in dust so intense it hid the moon from view. Before him was an enormous white horse rearing over him with a frightening scream. When the blinding dust had settled a bit, the boy trembled at what he saw. Astride the animal was a horseman dressed completely in black, with a falcon perched on his left shoulder. He wore a turban, and his entire face, except for his eyes, were covered with a black kerchief. He appeared to be a messenger from the desert, but his presence was much more powerful than that of a mere messenger. The strange horseman drew an enormous curved sword from a scabbard mounted on his saddle. A scabbard. The steel of its blade glittered in the light of the moon. "Who dares to read the meaning of the flight of the hawks?" he demanded, so loudly that his sword seemed to echo through the 50,000 palm trees of Al-Fayoum. "It is I who dare to do so," said the boy. He was reminded of the image of Santiago Matamoros, mounted on his white horse, with the infidels beneath his hooves. This man looked exactly the same, except now the roles were reversed. "It is I who dares to do so," he repeated, and he lowered his head to receive the blow from the swords. "Many lives will be saved because I was able to see through the soul of the world." The sword didn't fall. Instead, the stranger lowered it slowly until the point touched the boy's forehead. It drew a droplet of blood. The horseman was completely immobile, as was the boy. It didn't even occur to the boy to flee. In his heart, he felt a strange sense of joy. He was about to die in pursuit of his personal legend, and for Fatima, the omens had been true after all. Here he was, face to face with his enemy, but there was no need to be concerned about dying. The soul of the world awaited him, and he would soon be a part of it. And tomorrow his enemy would also be a part of that soul. The stranger continued to hold the sword at the boy's forehead. "Why did you read The Flight of the Birds?" "I read only what the birds wanted to tell me. They wanted to save the oasis. Tomorrow all of you will die, because there are more men at the oasis than you have." The sword remained where it was. "Who are you to change what Allah has willed?" "Allah created the armies. He also created the hawks. Allah taught me the language of the birds. Everything has been written by the same hand," the boy said, remembering the camel driver's words. The stranger withdrew the sword from the boy's forehead, and the boy felt immensely relieved. But he couldn't flee still. "Be careful with your prognostications," said the stranger. "When something is written, there is no way to change it." "All I saw was an army," said the boy. "I didn't see the outcome of the battle." The stranger seemed satisfied with the answer, but he kept his sword in his hand. "What is a stranger doing in a strange land?" "I'm following my personal legend. It's not something you would understand." The stranger placed his sword in the scabbard, and the boy relaxed. "I had to test your courage," the stranger said. "Courage is the quality most essential to understanding the language of the world." The boy was surprised. The stranger was speaking of things that very few people knew about. "You must not let up after having come so far," he continued. "You must love the desert, but never trust it completely, because the desert tests all men. It challenges every step and kills those who become distracted." What he said remained with the boy What he said reminded the boy of the old king. If the warriors come here and your head is still on your shoulders at sunset, come and find me, said the stranger. The same hand that had brandished the sword now held whip. The horse reared again, raising a cloud of dust. Where do you live? Shouted the boy as the horseman rode away. The hand with the whip pointed to the south. The boy had met the alchemist. Next morning, there were 2,000 armed men scattered throughout the palm trees at Al-Fayoum. Before the sun had reached its high point, 500 tribesmen appeared on the horizon. The mounted troops entered the oasis from the north. It appeared to be a peaceful expedition, but they all carried arms hidden in their robes. When they reached the white tent at the center of Al-Fayoum, they withdrew their scimitars, and rifles, and they attacked an empty tent. I don't know about war. The men of the oasis surrounded the horsemen from the desert within a half an hour. All but one of the intruders were dead. The children had been kept at the other side of a grove of palms and saw nothing of what had happened. The women had remained in their tents praying for the safekeeping of their husbands and saw nothing of the battle either. Were it not for the bodies on the ground, it would have appeared to have been a normal day at the oasis. The only tribesman spared was the commander of the battalion. That afternoon he was brought before the tribal chieftains, who asked him why he had violated the tradition. The commander said that his men had been starving and thirsty, exhausted from many days of battle, and had decided to take the oasis so as to be able to return to the war. The tribal chieftain said that he felt sorry for the tribesmen, but that the tradition was sacred. He commanded the commander to death without honor. Rather than being killed by a blade or a bullet, he was hanged from a palm tree, where his body twisted in the desert wind. The tribal chieftains called for the boy and presented him with 50 pieces of gold. He repeated his story about Joseph of Egypt and asked the boy to become the counselor of the oasis. When the sun had set and the first stars made their appearance, the boy started to walk to the south. He eventually sighted a single tent, and a group of Arabs passing by told the boy that it was a place inhabited by genies. But the boy sat down and waited. Not until the moon was high did the alchemist ride into view. He carried 2 dead hawks over his shoulder. "I am here," the boy said. "You shouldn't be here," the alchemist answered. "Or is it your personal legend that brings you here?" "With the wars between the tribes, it's impossible to cross the desert, so I have come here." The alchemist dismounted from his horse and signaled that the boy should enter the tent with him. It was a tent like many at the oasis. The boy looked around for the oven and other apparatuses used by alchemy, but saw none. There was only some books on a pile, a small cooking stove, and a carpet covered with mysterious designs. "Sit down. We'll have something to drink and eat these hawks," said the alchemist. The boy suspected that they were the same hawks he had seen the day before, but he said nothing. The alchemist lighted the fire, and soon a delicious aroma filled the tent. It was better than the scent of the hookahs. "Why do you want to see me?" the boy asked. "Because of the omens," the alchemist answered. "The wind told me you would be coming, and that you would need help." "It's not I the wind spoke about. It's the other foreigner, the Englishman. He's the one looking for you. He has other things to do first, but he's on the right track. He has begun to try to understand the desert." "What about me?" "When a person really desires something, All the universe conspires to help that person realize his dream, said the alchemist, echoing the words of the old king. The boy understood. Another person was there to help him towards his personal legend. So you're going to instruct me? No. You already know all you need to know. I am only going to point you in the direction of your treasure. But there's a tribal war, the boy reiterated. I know what's happening in the desert. I have already found my treasure. I have a camel. I have my money from the crystal shop, and I have 50 gold pieces. In my own country, I would be a rich man. But none of this is from the pyramids, said the alchemist. I also have Fatima, and she is a treasure greater than anything else I have won. She wasn't found at the pyramids either. They ate in silence. The alchemist opened a bottle and poured a red liquid into the boy's cup. It was the most delicious wine he has ever tasted. Isn't wine prohibited here? The boy asked. It's not what enters men's mouth that's evil. Ah, he said, the alchemist. It's what comes out of their mouth that is. The alchemist was a bit daunting, but as the boy drank the wine, he relaxed. After they finished eating, they sat down outside the tent under the moon so brilliant that it made the stars pale. Drink and enjoy yourself, said the alchemist, noticing that the boy was feeling happier. Rest well tonight, as if you were a warrior preparing for combat. Remember that wherever your heart is, there you will find your treasure. You've got to find the treasure so that everything you have learned along the way can make sense. Tomorrow, sell your camel and buy a horse. Camels are traitorous. They walk thousands of paces and never seem to tire. Then suddenly they kneel and die. But horses tire bit by bit. You always know how much you can ask of them, and when it is they are about to die. The following night, the boy appeared at the alchemist's tent with a horse. The alchemist was ready, and he mounted his own steed and placed the falcon on his left shoulder. He said to the boy, "Show me where there is life out in the desert. Only those who can see such signs of life are able to find treasure." They began to ride out over the sands, with the moonlight lighting their way. I don't know if I'll be able to find life in the desert, the boy thought. I don't know the desert that well yet. He wanted to say so to the alchemist, but he was afraid of the man. They reached the rocky place where the boy had seen the hawk in the sky, but now there was only a silence and wind. I don't know how to find life in the desert, the boy said. I know that there is life here, but I don't know where to look. Life attracts life, the alchemist answered. And then the boy understood. He loosened the reins on his horse, who galloped forward over the rocks and sand. The alchemist followed as the boy's horse ran for almost a half an hour. They could no longer see the palms of the oasis, only the gigantic moon above them and its silver reflections on the stone of the desert. Suddenly, for no apparent reason, the boy's horse began to slow. There's life here, the boy said to the alchemist. I don't know the language of the desert, but my horse knows the language of life. They dismounted, and the alchemist said nothing. Advancing slowly, they searched among the stones. The alchemist stopped abruptly and bent to the ground. There was a hole there among the stones. The alchemist put his hand inside the hole, and then his entire arm up to his shoulder. Something was moving there, and the alchemist's eyes, the boy could only see his eyes, squinted with effort. His arm seemed to be battling with whatever was in the hole. Then, With a motion that startled the boy, he withdrew an arm and leaped to his feet. In his hand, he grasped a snake by the tail. The boy leapt as well, but away from the alchemist. The snake fought frantically, making hissing sounds that shattered the silence of the desert. It was a cobra, whose venom could kill a person in minutes. "Watch out for his venom," the boy said. But even though the alchemist had put his hand in the hole and had surely already been bitten, his expression was calm. "The alchemist is 200 years old," the Englishman had told him. "He must have known how to deal with a snake of the desert." The boy watched as his companion went to his horse and withdrew a scimitar. What is that? With its blade, he drew a circle in the sand and then placed the snake within it. The serpent relaxed immediately. "Not to worry," said the alchemist. "He won't leave the circle." "You found life in the desert, the omen that I needed." "Why is that so important?" "Because the pyramids are surrounded by the desert." The boy didn't want to talk about the pyramids. His heart was heavy. He had been melancholy since the previous night. To continue his search for the treasure meant he would have to abandon Fatima. "I'm going to guide you across the desert," the alchemist said. "I want to stay in the oasis," the boy answered. "I found Fatima, and as far as I'm concerned, she's worth more than treasure." "Fatima is a woman of the desert," said the alchemist. "She knows that men have to go away in order to return. And she already has her treasure. It's you. Now she expects that you will find what it is you're looking for." "Well, what if I decide to stay?" "Let me tell you what will happen. You'll be the counselor of the oasis. You'll have enough gold to buy many sheep and many camels. You'll marry Fatima and you'll both be happy for a year. You'll learn to love the desert and you'll get to know every one of the 50,000 palms. You'll watch them as they grow, demonstrating how the world is always changing. And you'll get better and better at understanding omens, because the desert is the best teacher there is. Sometime during the second year, you'll remember about the treasure. The omens will begin insistently to speak of it, and you'll try to ignore them. You'll use your knowledge for the welfare of the oasis and its inhabitants. The tribal chieftains will appreciate what you do, and your camel will bring you wealth and power. During the third year, the omens will continue to speak of your treasure and your personal legend. You'll walk around night after night at the oasis, and Fatima will be unhappy because she'll feel it was her who had interrupted your quest. But you will love her, and she'll return your love. You'll remember that she never asked you to stay, because women of the desert knows that she must wait for her man. So you won't blame her. But many times you'll walk the sands of the desert thinking that maybe you could have left, that you could have trusted more in your love for Fatima, because what kept you at the oasis was your own fear that you might never come back. At that point, the omens will tell you that your treasure is buried forever. Then, sometime during the fourth year, the omens will abandon you because you've stopped listening to them. The tribal chieftains will see that, and you'll be dismissed from your position as a counselor. But by then, you'll be a rich merchant with many camels and a great deal of merchandise. You'll spend the rest of your days knowing you didn't pursue your personal legend, and that now it's too late. It's never too late. You must understand that love never keeps a man from pursuing his personal legend. If he abandons that pursuit, it's because it wasn't true love. The love that speaks the language of the world. That's helpful. The alchemist erased the circle in the sand, and the snake slithered away among the rocks. The boy remembered the crystal merchant who had always wanted to go to Mecca, and the Englishman in search of the alchemist. He thought of the woman who had trusted in the desert, and he looked out over the desert that had brought him to the woman he loved. They mounted their horses, and this time it was the boy who followed the alchemist back to the oasis. The wind brought the sounds of the oasis to them, and the boy tried to hear Fatima's voice. But that night, as he watched the cobra within the circle, the strange horseman with the falcon on his shoulder had spoken of love and treasure, of the women of the desert, and of his personal legend. "I'm going with you," the boy had said, and he immediately felt peace in his heart. "We'll leave tomorrow before sunrise," was the alchemist's only response. The boy slept a sleepless night. Let me try this again. The boy spent a sleepless night. 2 hours before dawn, he awoke one of the boys who slept in his tent and asked him to show him where Fatima lived. They went to her tent, and the boy gave his friend enough gold to buy a sheep. Then he asked his friend to go into the tent where Fatima was sleeping and to awaken her and to tell her he was waiting outside. The young Arab did as he was asked and was given enough gold to buy yet another sheep. "Now leave us alone," said the boy to the young Arab. The Arab turned to his tent to sleep, proud to have helped the counselor of the oasis, and happy at having enough money to buy himself some sheep. Fatima appeared at the entrance of the tent. The two walked out among the palms. The boy knew that it was a violation of the tradition, but it didn't matter to him now. "I'm going away," he said, "and I want you to know that I'm coming back." "I love you because—" "Don't say anything," Fatima interrupted. "One is loved because one is loved. No reason is needed for loving." The boy continued, "I had a dream and I met with the king. I sold crystal and crossed the desert. And because the tribes declared war, I went to the well, seeking the alchemist. So I love you because the entire universe conspired to help me find you." The two embraced, and it was for the first time either had touched the other. "I'll be back," the boy said. "Before this, I always looked to the desert with longing," said Fatima. "Now it will be with hope. My father went away one day, but he returned to my mother, and he has always come back since then." They said nothing else. They walked a bit farther among the palms, and then the boy left her at the entrance of the tent. "I'll return just as your father came back to your mother," he said. He saw that Fatima's eyes were filled with tears. "You're crying?" "I'm a woman of the desert," she said, averting her eyes. "But above all, I'm a woman." Fatima went back to her tent, and when daylight came, she went out to do chores as she had done for years. But everything had changed. The boy was no longer at the oasis, and the oasis would never again have the same meaning it had only yesterday. It would no longer be a place with 50,000 palm trees and 300 wells, where pilgrims arrived and relieved at the end of their long journeys. From that day on, the oasis would be an empty place for her. From that day on, it was the desert that would be important. She would look to it every day and would try to guess which star the boy was following in search of his treasure. She would have to send her kisses on the wind, hoping that the wind would touch the boy's face and would tell him that she was alive, that she was waiting for him, a woman awaiting a courageous man in search of his treasure. From that day on, the desert would represent only one thing to her: the hope for his return. Don't think about what you've left behind, the alchemist said to the boy as they began to ride across the sand of the desert. Everything is written in the soul of the world, and it is stay there forever. Men dream more about coming home than about leaving, said the boy. He was already accustomed to the desert silence. If what one finds is made of pure matter, it will never spoil. And one can always come back. If what you have found was only a moment of light, like the explosion of a star, you will find nothing on your return. The man was speaking the language of alchemy, but the boy knew that he was referring to Fatima. It was difficult not to think about what he had left behind. The desert, with its endless monotony, put him into dreaming. The boy could still see the palm trees, the wells, and the faces of the women he loved. He could see the Englishman at his experiments and the camel driver who was a teacher without realizing it. Maybe the alchemist had never been in love, the boy thought. The alchemist rode in front, with the falcon on his shoulder. The bird knew the language of the desert well. When they stopped, he flew off in search of game. On the first day he returned with a rabbit, and on the second with 2 birds. At night they spread their sleeping gear and slept there and kept their fires hidden. The desert nights were cold and were becoming darker and darker as the phases of the moon passed. They went on for a week, speaking only of the precautions they needed to follow in order to avoid the battles between the tribes. The war continued, and at times the wind carried the sweet, sickly smell of blood. Battle had been fought nearby, and the wind reminded the boy that there was the language of omens, always ready to show him what his eyes had failed to observe. On the 7th day, the alchemist decided to make camp earlier than usual. The falcon flew off to find game, and the alchemist offered his water container to the boy. "You are almost at the end of your journey," said the alchemist. "I congratulate you for having pursued your personal legend." "And you have told me nothing along the way," the boy said. "I thought you were going to teach me some of the things you know. A while ago, I rode through the desert with a man who had books on alchemy, but I wasn't able to learn anything from them." "There's only one way to learn," the alchemist answered. "It's through action. Everything you need to know you have learned through your journey. You need to learn only one more thing." The boy wanted to know what that was, but the alchemist was searching the horizon, looking for the falcon. "Why are you called the alchemist?" "Because that's what I am." "And what went wrong when other alchemists tried to make gold and weren't able to do so?" "They were looking only for gold," his companion answered. "They were seeking the treasure of their personal legend without wanting to actually live out the personal legend." "What is it that I still need to know?" the boy asked. But the alchemist continued to look at the horizon, and finally the falcon returned with a meal. They dug a hole and lit their fire in it, so the light of the flames would not be seen. "I am an alchemist simply because I am an alchemist," he said as he prepared the meal. "I learned the science from my grandfather, who learned it from his father, and so on, back to the creation of the world. In those times, the masterwork could be written simply on an emerald. But men began to reject simple things and to write tracts and interpretations and philosophical studies. They also began to feel that they knew a better way than the others. Yet the emerald tablet is still alive today." "What was written on the emerald tablet?" the boy wanted to know. The alchemist began to draw on the sand and completed his drawing in less than 5 minutes. As he drew, the boy thought of the old king and the plaza where they had met that day. It seemed as if it had taken place years and years ago. "This is what is written on the emerald tablet," said the alchemist when he finished. The boy tried to read what was written on the sand. "It's a code," said the boy, a bit disappointed. "It looks like what I saw in the Englishman's books." "No," the alchemist answered. "It's like the flight of those two hawks. It can't be understood by reason alone. The emerald tablet is a direct passage to the soul of the world." The wise men understood that this natural world is only an image and a copy of paradise. We're the reflection. The existence of this world is simply a guarantee that there exists a world that is perfect. God created the world so that through its visible objects, men could understand his spiritual teaching and the marvels of his wisdom. That's what I mean by action. "Should I understand the emerald tablet?" the boy asked. "Perhaps if you were in a laboratory of alchemy, this would be the right time to study the best way to understand the emerald tablet. But you are in the desert, so immerse yourself in it. The desert will give you an understanding of the world. In fact, anything on the surface of the earth will do that. You don't even have to understand the desert. All you have to do is contemplate a simple grain of sand, and you will see in it all the marvels of creation." "How do I immerse myself in the desert?" "Listen to your heart. It knows all things because it came from the soul of the world, and it will one day return there." They crossed the desert for another 2 days in silence. The alchemists had become much more cautious because they were approaching the area where the most violent battles were being waged. And as they moved along, the boy tried to listen to his heart. It was not easy to do. In earlier times, his heart had always been ready to tell its story, but lately, that wasn't true. There had been times when his heart spent hours telling him of its sadness, and at other times it became so emotional over the desert sunrise that the boy had to hide his tears. His heart beat fastest when it spoke to the boy of treasure, and more slowly when the boy stared entranced at the endless horizon of the desert. But his heart was never quiet, even when the boy and the alchemist had fallen into silence. "Why do we have to listen to our hearts?" the boy asked when they had made up that camp that day. "Because wherever your heart is, that is where you'll find your treasure." "But my heart is agitated," the boy said. It has its dreams, it gets emotional, and it becomes passionate over women of the desert. It asks things of me, and it keeps me from sleeping many nights when I'm thinking about her." "Well, that's good. Your heart is alive. Keep listening to what it has to say." During the next 3 days, the two travelers passed by a number of armed tribesmen and saw others on the horizon. The boy's heart began to speak of fear. It told him stories it had heard from the soul of the world, stories of men who sought to find their treasure and never succeeded. Sometimes it frightened the boy with the idea that he might not find his treasure, or that he might die there in the desert. At other times, it told the boy that it was satisfied, it had found love and riches. "My heart is a traitor," the boy said to the alchemist when they had paused to rest the horses. "It doesn't want me to go on." That makes sense," the alchemist answered. "Naturally, it's afraid that in pursuing your dreams, you might lose everything you've won." "Well, then, why should I listen to my heart?" because you will never again be able to keep it quiet. Even if you pretend not to have heard what it tells you, it will always be there inside of you, repeating to you what you're thinking about life and about the world. You mean I should listen even if it's treacherous or treasonous? Treason is a blow that comes unexpectedly. If you know your heart well, it will never be able to do that, because you'll know its dreams and wishes, and will know how to deal with them. You will never be able to escape from your heart, so it's better to listen to what it has to say. That way, you'll never have to fear an unanticipated blow. The boy continued to listen to his heart as they crossed the desert. He came to understand its dodges and tricks, and he accepted it as it was. He lost his fear and forgot about his need to go back to the oasis, because one afternoon his heart told him that it was happy. Even though I complain sometimes, it says, it's because I am in the heart of a person, and people's hearts are that way. People are afraid to pursue their most important dreams because they feel they don't deserve them, or that they'll be unable to achieve them. We, their hearts, become fearful just thinking of loved ones who go away forever, or of moments that could have been good but weren't, or of treasures that might have been found but were hidden forever in the sands. Because when those things happen, we suffer terribly. My heart is afraid that it will have to suffer, the boy told the alchemist one night as they looked up at the moonless sky. Well, tell your heart that the fear of suffering is worse than the suffering itself, and that no heart has ever suffered when it goes in search of its dreams, because every second of the search is a second's encounter with God and with eternity. Every second of the search is an encounter with God, the boy told his heart. Every second of the search is an encounter with God. When I have been truly searching for my treasure, every day has been luminous, because I've known that every hour was a part of the dream that I would find it. When I've been truly searching for my treasure, I've discovered things along the way I would have never seen had I not had the courage, to try things that seemed impossible for a shepherd to achieve. So his heart was quiet for an entire afternoon. That night the boy slept deeply, and when he awoke, his heart began to tell him things that came from the soul of the world. It said that all people who are happy have God with them, and that happiness could be found in a grain of sand from the desert, as the alchemist had said, because a grain of sand is a moment of creation, and the universe has taken millions of years to create it. Everyone on earth has a treasure that awaits him, his heart said. People's hearts seldom say much about those treasures, because people no longer want to go in search of them. We speak of them only to children. Later, we simply let life proceed in its own direction towards its own fate, but unfortunately, very few follow the path laid out for them, the path of their personal legends, and to happiness. Most people see the world as a threatening place, because they do, the world turns out, indeed, to be a threatening place. So we, their hearts, speak more and more softly. We never stop speaking out, but we begin to hope that our words won't be heard. We don't want people to suffer because they don't follow their hearts. Why don't people's hearts tell them to continue to follow their dreams? The boy asked the alchemist. Because that's what makes the heart suffer most, and hearts don't like to suffer. From then on, the boy understood his heart. He asked it, please never stop speaking to him. Please never stop speaking to me. He asked that when he wandered far from his dreams. his heart press him and sound the alarm. The boy swore that every time he heard the alarm, he would heed the message. That night, he told all of this to the alchemist, and the alchemist understood that the boy's heart had returned to the soul of the world. So what should I do now? The boy said. Continue in the direction of the pyramids, said the alchemist, and continue to pay heed to the omens. Your heart is still capable of showing you where the treasure is. Is that the one thing I still need to know? No, the alchemist answered. What you still need to know is this. Before a dream is realized, the soul of the world tests everything that was learned along the way. It does this not because it is evil, but so we can, in addition to realizing our dreams, master the lessons we've learned as we've moved towards the dream. There's a point at which most people give up. It's a point at which, as we say in the language of the desert, one dies of thirst just when the palm trees have appeared on the horizon. Every search begins with beginner's luck, and every search ends with the victors being severely tested. Not sure about that, but it seems like it. The boy remembered an old proverb from his country. It said that the darkest hour of the night came just before the dawn. On the following day, the first clear sign of danger appeared. 3 armed tribesmen approached and asked what the boy and the alchemist were doing there. I'm hunting with my falcon, the alchemist answered. We're going to have to search you to see whether you're armed, one of the tribesmen said. The alchemist dismounted slowly, and the boy did the same. Why are you carrying money? The tribesman asked when he searched the boy's bag. I needed to get to the pyramids, he said. The tribesman who had been searching the alchemist's belongings found a small crystal flask filled with liquid and a yellow glass egg that was slightly larger than a chicken's egg. What are these things? Well, that's the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. It's the masterwork of alchemists. Whoever swallows that elixir will never be sick again, and a fragment from the stone turns any metal into gold. The Arabs laughed at him, and the alchemist laughed along. They thought his answer was amusing, and they allowed the boy and the alchemist to proceed with all of their belongings. Are you crazy? The boy asked the alchemist when they had moved along. What did you do that for? To show you one of life's simple lessons, the alchemist answered. When you possess great treasures within you, and you try to tell others of them, seldom do they believe you. They continued across the desert. With every day that passed, the boy's heart became more and more silent. It no longer wanted to know about things of the past or the future. It was content simply contemplating the desert and to drink with the boy from the soul of the world. The boy and his heart had become friends, and neither was capable now of betraying the other. Oh, excuse me. When his heart spoke to him, it was to provide a stimulus to the boy and to give him strength, because the days of silence there in the desert were wearisome. His heart told the boy what his strongest qualities were: his courage in having given up his sheep and in trying to live out his personal legend, and his enthusiasm during that time he had worked. What the heck? And his enthusiasm during the time he worked at the crystal shop. His heart told him something else that the boy had never noticed. It told the boy of dangers that had threatened him, but he had never perceived. His heart said that one time it had hidden the rifle the boy had taken from his father because of the possibility that the boy might wound himself. It reminded the boy of the day when he had been ill and vomiting out in the fields, after which he had fallen into a deep sleep. There had been 2 thieves farther ahead who were planning to steal the boy's sheep and murder him, but since the boy hadn't passed by, they decided to move on, thinking he had changed his route. Does a man's heart always help him? The boy asked the alchemist. Mostly just the hearts of those who are trying to realize their personal legends, but they do help children, drunkards, and the elderly too. Does that mean that I'll never run into danger? It means only that the heart does what it can, the alchemist says. One afternoon they passed by the encampment of one of the tribes. At each corner of the encampment were Arab guards, garbed in beautiful white robes with arms at the ready. The men were smoking their hookahs and trading stories from the battlefield. No one paid any attention to the 2 travelers. There's no danger, the boy said when they had moved past the encampment. The alchemist sounded angry. Trust your heart, but never forget that you're in the desert. When men are at war with one another, the soul of the world can hear the screams of the battle. No one fails to suffer the consequences of everything under the sun. All things are one, the boy thought. And then, as if the desert wanted to demonstrate what the alchemist was saying, 2 horsemen appeared from behind the travelers. You can't go any farther, one of them said. You're in the area where the tribes are at war. I'm not going very far, the alchemist answered, looking straight into the eyes of the horsemen. They were silent for a moment, and then agreed that the boy and the alchemist could move along. The boy watched the exchange with fascination. You dominated those horsemen with the way you looked at them. Your eyes show the strength of your soul, answered the alchemist. That's true, thought the boy. He had noticed that in the midst of the multitude of armed men back at the encampment, there had just been one who stared fixedly at the 2. He had been so far away that his face wasn't even visible, but the boy was certain he had been looking at them. Finally, when they had crossed the mountain range that extended along the entire horizon, the alchemist said that they were only 2 days from the pyramids. If we're going to go our separate ways soon, the boy said, then teach me about alchemy. You already know about alchemy. It's about penetrating the soul of the world and discovering treasure that has been reserved for you. No, that's not what I mean. I'm talking about transforming lead into gold. The alchemist fell as silent as the desert, and answered the boy only after they had stopped to eat. Everything in the universe evolved, he said. And for wise men, gold is the metal that evolved the furthest. Don't ask me why. I don't know why. I just know that the tradition is always right. Men have never understood the words of the wise. So gold, instead of being seen as a symbol of evolution, becomes the bias for conflict. There are many languages spoken by things, the boy said. There was a time when, for me, a camel's whinnying was nothing more than whinnying. Then it became a signal of danger, and finally it just became whinnying again. But then he stopped. The alchemist probably already knew that. I have known true alchemists, the alchemist continued. They locked themselves in their laboratories and tried to evolve, as gold had. And they found the philosopher's stone because they understood that when something evolves, everything around that thing evolves as well. Others stumble upon the stone by accident. They already had the gift, and their souls were readier for such things than the souls of others, but they don't count. They're quite rare. And then there were the others who were interested only in gold. They never found the secret. They forgot that lead, copper, and iron have their own personal legends to fulfill. And anyone who interferes with the personal legend of another thing will never discover their own. The alchemist's words echoed out like a curse. He reached over and picked up a shell from the ground. This desert was once a sea. I noticed that, answered the boy. The alchemist told the boy to place the shell over his ear. He had done that many times when he was a child, and he heard the sound of the sea. The sea has lived in this shell because it is its personal legend, and it will never cease doing so until the desert is once again covered by the water. They mounted their horses and rode out to the direction of the pyramids. The sun was setting when the boy The sun was setting when the boy's heart sounded a danger signal. They were surrounded by gigantic dunes, and the boy looked at the alchemist to see whether he had sensed anything, but he appeared to be unaware of any danger. 5 minutes later, the boy saw 2 horsemen awaiting ahead of them. Before he could say anything to the alchemist, the 2 horsemen had become 10, and then 100, and then they were everywhere in the dunes. They were tribesmen dressed in blue with black rings around their turbans. Their faces were hidden behind blue veils, with only their eyes showing. Even from a distance, their eyes conveyed the strength of their soul, and their eyes spoke of death. The 2 were taken to a nearby military camp. A soldier shoved the boy and the alchemist into a tent where the chief was holding a meeting with his staff. "These are the spies," said one of the men. "We're just travelers," the alchemist answered. "You were seen at the enemy camp 3 days ago, and you were talking with one of the troops there." "I'm just a man who wanders the desert and knows the stars," the alchemist said. "I have no information about troops or about how the movement of the tribes are going. I was simply acting as a guide for my friend here." "Who is your friend?" asked the chief. "An alchemist," said the alchemist. "He understands the forces of nature, and he wants to show you his extraordinary powers." The boy listened quietly and fearfully. "What is a foreigner doing here?" asked another of the men. "He has brought money to give to your tribe," said the alchemist, before the boy could say a word, and seizing the boy's bag, the alchemist gave the gold coins to the chief. The Arab accepted them without a word. There was enough there to buy a lot of weapons. "What is an alchemist?" he asked finally. "It's a man who understands the nature and the world. If he wanted to, he could destroy this camp with just one force of the wind." The men laughed. They were used to the ravages of the war, and they knew the wind could not deliver them a fatal blow. Yet each felt his heart beat a little faster. They were men of the desert, and they were fearful of sorcerers. "I want to see him do it," said the chief. "He needs 3 days," said the alchemist. "He is going to transform himself into the wind, just to demonstrate his power. If he can't do it, we so humbly offer you our lives for the honor of your tribe." "You can't offer me something that's already mine," the chief said arrogantly. But he granted the travelers 3 days. The boy was shaking with fear, but the alchemist helped him out of the tent. "Don't let them see you afraid," the alchemist said. "They are brave men, and they despise cowards." But the boy couldn't even speak. He was able to do only after a walk through the center of the camp. There was no need to imprison them. The Arabs simply confiscated their horses. So, once again, the world had demonstrated its many languages. The desert only moments ago, had been endless and free, and now it was an impenetrable wall. You gave them everything I had, the boy said. Everything I saved my entire life. Well, what good would it be to you if you had to die? The alchemist answered. Your money saved us for 3 days. It's not often that money saves a person's life. But the boy was too frightened to listen to the words of wisdom. He had no idea how he was going to transform himself into the wind. He wasn't an alchemist. The alchemist asked one of the soldiers for some tea and poured some on the boy's wrist. A wave of relief rushed over him, and the alchemist muttered some words that the boy didn't understand. Don't give in to your fears, the alchemist said in a strangely gentle voice. If you do, you won't be able to talk to your heart. But if I have no idea how to turn myself into the wind, what? If a person is living out his personal legend, he knows everything he needs to know. There is only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve: the fear of failure. I am not afraid of failing. It's just that I don't know how to turn myself into the wind. Well, you'll have to learn. Your life depends on it. But what if I can't? Well, then you'll die in the midst of trying to realize your personal dream. That's a lot better than dying like millions of other people who never even know what their personal legend is. But don't worry, the alchemist continued. Usually the threat of death makes people a lot more aware of their lives. The first day passed. There was a major battle nearby, and a number of wounded were brought back to the camp. The dead soldiers were replaced by others, and life went on. Death doesn't change anything, the boy thought. You could have died later on, a soldier said to the boy of one of his companions. You could have died after peace had been declared, but in any case, you were going to die. At the end of the day, the boy went looking for the alchemist, who had taken his falcon into the desert. I still have no idea how to turn myself into the wind, the boy repeated. Remember what I told you. The world is only the visible aspect of God, and that what alchemy does is to bring spiritual perfection into contact with the material plane. What are you doing? Feeding my falcon. If I'm not able to turn myself into wind, we're going to die, the boy said. Why feed your falcon? You're the one who may die, the alchemist said. I already know how to turn myself into wind. On the second day, the boy climbed to the top of a cliff near the camp. The sentinel allowed him to go. They had already heard about the sorcerer who could turn himself into the wind, and they didn't want to go near him. In any case, the desert was impassable. He spent the entire afternoon of the second day looking out over the desert, listening to his heart. The boy knew the desert sensed his fear. They both spoke the language of the world. On the third day, the chief met with his officers. He called the alchemist to the meeting and said, "Let's see this boy who turns himself into the wind." "Let's," the alchemist answered. The boy took them to the cliff where he had been on the previous day. He told them all to be seated. "It's going to take a while," the boy said. "Why, no hurry," the chief said. "We are men of the desert." The boy looked out at the horizon. There were mountains in the distance, and there were dunes, rocks, and plants that insisted on living where survival seemed impossible. There was the desert that he had wandered for so many months. Despite all that time, he knew only a small part of it. Within that small part, he had found an Englishman, caravans, tribal wards, and an oasis with 50,000 palm trees and 300 wells. "What do you want here today?" the desert asked him. Do you want to spend enough time looking at you? Didn't you? Didn't you spend enough time looking at me yesterday? "Somewhere you hold the person I love," the boy said. "So when you look out over your sands, I am also looking at her. I want to return to her, and I need your help so that I can return myself to her and turn myself into the wind." "What is love?" the desert asked. "Love is the falcon's flight over your sands, because for him you are a green field from which he always returns with game. He knows your rocks, your dunes, your mountains, and you are generous to him. The falcon's beak carries bits of me, myself," said the desert. "For years I care for his game, feeding it with the little water that I have, and then I show him where the game is. And one day, as I enjoy the fact that his game thrives on my surface, the falcon dives out of the sky and takes away what I have created." "But that's why you've created the game in the first place," the boy answered, "to nourish the falcon, and the falcon then to nourish man, and eventually man will nourish your sands, where the game will once again flourish, and that's how the world goes." "So is that what love is?" "Yes, that's what love is. It's what makes the game become the falcon become man, and man in turn the desert. It's what turns lead into gold and makes gold return to the earth." "I don't understand what you're talking about," the desert said. "But can you at least understand that somewhere in your sands there's a woman waiting for me, and that's why I have to turn myself into the wind?" The desert didn't answer him for a few moments. Then it told him, "I'll give you my sands to help the wind to blow. Oh my gosh. I'll give you my sands to help the wind to blow, but alone. I can't do anything. You have to ask for help from the wind." The breeze began to blow. The tribesmen watched the boy from a distance, talking among themselves in a language the boy couldn't understand. The alchemist smiled. The wind approached the boy and touched his face. It knew of the boy's talk with the desert because the wind knows everything. They blow across the world without a birthplace and with no place to die. "Help me," the boy said. "One day you carried the voice of my loved one to me." "Who taught you to speak the language of the desert and the wind?" "My heart," the boy answered. "The wind has many names. In that part of the world it's called Sroko, or maybe it's Srocho, because it brought moisture from the oceans to the east. In the distant land the boy came from, they called it the Levanter, because they believed that it brought with it sands of the desert and the screams of the Moorish wars. Perhaps in the places beyond the pastures where his sheep lived, men thought that the wind came from Andalusia, but actually the wind came from no place at all, nor did it go to any place. That's why it was stronger than the desert." Someone might one day plant a tree in the desert and even raise sheep there, but never would they harness the wind. "You can't be the wind said. "We're two different things." "That's not true," the boy said. "I've learned the alchemist's secrets in my travels. I have inside me the wind, the desert, the ocean, the stars, everything created in the universe. we were all made by the same hand, and we have the same soul. I want to be like you, able to reach every corner of the world, across the sea, blow away the sands that cover my treasure, and carry the voice of the woman I love. I heard what you were talking about the other day with the alchemist, the wind said. He said everything has its own personal legend, but people can't turn themselves into wind. Just teach me to be the wind for a few minutes, the boy said, so you and I can talk about the limitless possibilities of people in the winds. The curiosity of the wind was aroused, something that had never happened before. It wanted to talk about those things, but I didn't know how to turn a man into the wind. And look at how many things the wind already knew how to do. It created deserts, sank ships, felled entire forests, and blew through cities filled with music and strange noises. It felt like it had no limits, and yet here was a boy saying that there were other things the wind should be able to do. This is what we call love, the boy said, seeing that the wind was close to granting his response. When you are loved, you can do anything in creation. When you are loved, there is no need at all to understand what is happening, because everything happens within you. Even men can turn themselves into the wind, as long as the wind helps, of course. The wind was a proud being and was becoming irritated with what the boy was saying. It commenced to blow harder, raising the desert sands. But finally it had to recognize that even making its may way around the world, it didn't know how to turn a man into the wind, and it knew nothing about love. In my travels around the world, I've often seen people speaking of love and looking towards the heavens, the wind said, furious at having to acknowledge its own limitations. Maybe it's better to ask heaven. Well then, help me do that, the boy said. Fill this place with a sandstorm so strong that it blots out the sun. Then I can look to the heaven without blinding myself. So the wind blew with all its strength, and the sky was filled with sand, and the sun turned into a golden disk. At the camp, it was difficult. At the camp, it was difficult to see anything. The men of the desert were already familiar with the wind. They called it the sinim. It was worse than a storm at sea. Their horses cried out, and all their weapons were filed with sand. Filed. On the heights, one of the commanders turned to this chief and said, "Maybe we had better end this." They could barely see the boy. Their faces were covered with blue cloths. Their eyes showed fear. "Let's stop this," another commander said. "I want to see the greatness of Allah," the chief said with respect. "I want to see how a man turns himself into the wind." But he made a mental note of the names of the two men who had expressed their fear. As soon as the wind stopped, he was going to remove them from the commands, because true men of the desert are not afraid. "The wind told me that you know about love," the boy said to the sun. "If you know about love, you must also know about the soul of the world, because it's made of love. Everything in which we move, live and move and have our being." Anyway, it communicates with my soul, and together we cause the plants to grow and the sheep to seek out shade. From where I am, and I am a long way from the earth, I learned how to love. I know that if I came even a little bit closer to the earth, everything there would die, and the soul of the world would no longer exist. So we contemplate each other, and we want each other. and I give it life and warmth, and it gives me my reason for living. So you know about love, said the boy, and I know about the soul of the world, because we have talked at great length to each other during this endless trip through this universe. It tells me that its greatest problem is that up until now, only the minerals and vegetables understand that all things are one. That there's no need for iron to be the same as copper or copper to be the same as gold. Each performs its own exact function as a unique being, and everything would be a symphony of peace if the hand that wrote all that had stopped on the 5th day of creation. But there was the 6th day, the sun went on. You are wise because you observe everything from a distance, the boy says, but you don't know about love. If there hadn't been a 6th day, man would not exist. Copper would always just be copper, and lead just be lead. It's true that everything has its personal legend, but one day that personal legend will be realized. So each thing has to transform itself into something better, and to acquire a new personal legend until someday the soul of the world becomes one thing only. The sun thought about that and decided to shine more brightly. The wind, which was enjoying the conversation, started to blow with greater force, so the sun would not blind the boy. This is why alchemy exists, the boy said, so that everyone will search for his treasure, find it, and then want to be better than he was in his former life. Lead will play its role until the world has no further need for lead, and then lead will have to turn itself into gold. That's what alchemists do. They show that when we strive to become better than we are, everything around us becomes better too. Well, why did you say that I don't know about love? The sun asked the boy. Because it's not love to be static like the desert, nor is it love to roam the world like the wind. And it's not love to see everything from a distance like you do. Love is the force that transforms and improves the soul of the world. When I first reached through to it, I thought the soul of the world was perfect. But later I could see that it was just, But later I could see it was like other aspects of creation, and it had its own passions and wars. It is we who nourish the soul of the world. Oh, and the world we live in will be either better or worse, depending on whether we become better or worse. And that's where the power of love comes in. Because when we love, we always strive to become better than we are. So what do you want of me? The sun asked. I want you to help me turn myself into the wind, the boy answered. Nature knows me as the wisest being in creation, the sun said, but I don't know how to turn you into the wind. Then whom shall I ask? The sun thought for a moment. The wind was listening closely and wanted to tell every corner of the world that the sun's wisdom had its limitations. It was unable to deal with this boy who spoke the language of the world. Speak to the hand that wrote it all, said the sun. The wind screamed with delight and blew harder than